We're gonna have a little chat in this video today. I'm calling this in defense of the G43 because it seems to be more and more prevalent that people are talking bad about the German Gewehr 43, later the K43 rifle. I'm just going to call it the G43. There's a couple of videos that come to mind that I've watched where I think there's some kind of unfair points made about the G43. I have a little bit of a bias because I've always really liked the G43s. I think they're smooth shooting. The G41s really aren't that bad either. And so I just kind of want to discuss some of the points of that because it's just, I don't think it's fair. Now, the first point I want to bring up is how people calling the G43 a bad rifle is, well, calling anything bad or good really is an exercise in relativism, right? So you're saying that if you say the G43 is bad, you're saying it's bad because there's something better, right? If the G43, say, in whatever universe, this was maybe the first or the only semi-auto rifle of World War II, it would be the best, right? It would be the opposite. It'd sort of be like the Lebel rifle, right? Like it's, it's the first of its kind, and no matter how bad the rifle is, it would be, people would be saying how, how great this was and how, what an interesting concept and everything. And just kind of looking at it more objectively, what is some of the criticisms of it, which I don't think are all fair, and we're going to talk through some of those here today. First off, a lot of times when people talk about the G43 not being a good rifle, they talk about it sort of like the G43 is not a good rifle because the M1 is a really good rifle. Comparing it directly to the M1, which is not a fair comparison really. I get that they fought against each other like at the same time, and so if you're a soldier in 44, you could maybe pick up one or both of these off the ground in the battlefield or whatever. And so you can compare it that way, what's being used at that given time, but objectively, like a sort of timeless view of the rifles, it's kind of hard to compare it because the M1 was in service for 5 years before World War II. John Garand, he worked on this rifle for decades, refining it. And even after it was adopted, these had the similar, bang gas system as a G41, the M1s when they were first adopted. And then the U.S. Army, Springfield Armory, put a lot of R&D effort into fixing it and speeding up production. So it's kind of a hard comparison to make a rifle that had years and years of peacetime development versus a rifle that is being sort of introduced and made while they're being bombed, actively being bombed in a war. So it's not a best comparison. I think a fair comparison to the G43 would be something like, I think you can just barely see one here, like an SVT-40, like an AG-42 Jungmann, or like a MOS-40, something like that. Something with early developmental history that maybe was just sort of being introduced. Now, high production numbers does not a good rifle make. Just because a rifle was made a little or a lot does not directly correlate to a good or a bad rifle. And in fact, the G43 production numbers roughly equate to the M1 around 1941, 1942. M1 rifle production just exploded, and like 44 it peaked. But early war M1 production is pretty similar to the G43, so I don't think that the total production has anything to do with the quality of the rifle. As long as it's like out of like 5, like out of a prototype early numbers. If it's in mass production and the numbers are in the hundreds of thousands, that doesn't really influence whether or not a rifle is good or not. Now, the next sort of point you might make is component breakage. Well, G43s, I hear people are breaking components on G43s all the time, right? Everyone's heard about the sort of bolt housing, the stamped sheet metal bolt housing on G43s cracking. And, that is a real thing. Now, this is 80 years later. This is 80 years after, 1944 production. So yes, 80 years later, after an unknown round count through these rifles, you will have component breakage. I've had to replace parts on my M1s here. So it's not like makes a bad rifle just because some components are weak, some components weren't made to be shot for 80 years. You know, some components were just made poorly because of the fact that they were being bombed and improper heat treatment, or the proper steel couldn't be used. So there's a lot of different qualities in that rifle. Also, it was very hard to even get these bolt housings to be made out of stamped sheet metal. That was sort of a miracle that was even meant to happen with how complex the shapes are. That was always, when the rifle was designed, that was just meant to be milled steel, which is, you know, strong, but it's also very hard to and very slow to manufacture versus stamping. So yeah, you will have parts breakage on G43s, like safeties pop off, but the gun was designed to work without the safety. The safety can pop off a G43, and it's just permanently in the safety off position. Then it'll still fire and everything. So some of those weaknesses were sort of known in the design. But again, had this rifle been produced for 5 or 10 years, maybe that would have been ironed out. Maybe a new system, you know, safety system or something like that would have been introduced. The next thing people kind of point to is sort of saying it's bad is the fact that they took the Tokarev gas system and put it in the G43, which I don't understand that sort of argument. It's like saying the rifle is bad because the Tokarev gas system is great. You know, the AR-180s use a Tokarev sort of derived gas system, and AR-18s, AR-180s, and all the rifles that sort of follow that family of rifles, they're good. Nobody says anything about the gas systems being bad just because they're, you know, based on the Tokarev system. So yeah, that's just what rifles do. They evolve. You borrow designs from other countries. Every rifle design does that, right? Nothing is designed completely in a vacuum, right? Guns sort of influence each other. Now, accuracy and usability of the G43 is actually pretty good. I mean, you can watch, you know, videos on In Range or the early Forgotten Weapons videos of G43s being used in matches, and they do pretty well, you know, within contemporary, you know, World War II rifles. In fact, there's a guy named Jeb Hardy who I talked to. He wins matches quite often with his G43s, and he beats M1 Garands. Most of the World War II rifles used in the matches he's up against is M1 Garands, and he beats them with his G43 all the time. I'll show some of the awards here. He has a YouTube channel if you want to see some of his shooting. So these rifles are more accurate than you might expect. Even the G41 is pretty accurate if you actually try to shoot something with it. So it's not an inaccurate design, and it's not like an unreliable rifle either. You know, one of the things people say with it is that the gas system on the G43s is overgassed, and that's because it's a non-adjustable gas system. So you set it for the harshest environment, right? Which would be like a Russian or Norwegian super cold. And in those sort of super cold conditions, which the G41 would fail in, you have to adjust the gas to that high setting, and then it's just there all the time. And that was actually a known issue. That was known about in 1944, which is why Walther fixed it. They started drilling holes into the piston cups in the G43 gas systems. So Walther was addressing that problem during the war. Just a lot of people don't know the sort of improvements that Walther was putting into the rifle late into the war, just because those rifles aren't super common or talked about for some reason. Like the field stripping, right? Field stripping G43s, everybody knows, you know, all the components are scrunched together, and then you press a button and they kind of, you know, want to explode out. That was completely fixed by Walther late in the war. Late Walther guns, they omit that little takedown button on the bolt housing, and they use a much simpler disassembly method, and I did a video on that. I can put it here for you. There's a much simpler disassembly method. They improved the gas system. They were really, Walther was improving the G43 right up until the end of the war. So some of those issues, yeah, those are just teething problems. Those are early rifle production problems. Like other rifles had similar problems as well, and they were fixing those. So you can't judge like an early G43's teething problem. You kind of would, a better comparison of what a G43 is, or a K43, would be kind of like the late Walther 1945 production, when they kind of fixed a lot of those issues. And the G43 has some really good features that other rifles of its time don't necessarily have. Like, they have this universal optics mount system on the G43s. So that's an original G43 scope and mount on that rifle there. So they can pretty easily, you could slap a scope onto one of those things and you have a pretty effective designated marksman rifle. There's some stories of these being used that I've heard these rifles were put into great effect in the right circumstances with a correctly trained soldier. That is a great system. The muzzles were threaded. Just off camera, but up there, the muzzles were threaded on G43s to accept like blank firing adapters, and originally they were going to take silencers or suppressors. They were going to take, because the thought was you give, each squad would have one of these that's scoped with a suppressor on it, and then that could make silent, accurate shots, that to greatly improve the firepower of a given German squad. So it's a pretty forward-thinking rifle in terms of that. The ergonomics is good. This was actually meant to be reloaded with the left hand while holding, the sort of semi-pistol grip. So the ergonomics are not bad. Swapping mags on these are not bad. And unlike a lot of earlier semi-auto rifles, these have really good box magazines. These really have, like, you don't run into issues with like the magazines not matching or anything. They're really good, really good mag compatibility between the different mags. And another sort of criticism of it is, well, if the G43 was good, it would have been used after the war, right? Other countries would have adopted the design if it was good. And that's true. I think only one country produced G43s after the war. Many countries still used it after the war. Czechoslovakia, East and West Germany used G43s that were in inventory after the war. But Brazil actually manufactured a copy of the G43. I forgot the name of it. I'll put it on the screen here. But Brazil produced a G43 clone after the war. And also, there's a lot of other factors on whether or not a rifle is going to be produced, other than is that rifle good. The U.S. made millions of these M1s, and the U.S. was very generous with giving M1s out to its allies after the war. So, everyone's broke after World War II, so nobody's going to be maybe looking to adopt and design a German design. They lost the war, so a lot of those guys were designing the G43 that would sort of carry on the development, right? They're dead or in captivity or in hiding or whatever. So that's sort of, there's other factors on whether or not a rifle like the G43 can be made after the war, right? Economics is one. Why develop and make a G43 when you could just get cheap M1s, right, from the US? So a rifle being used or not after the war, being made by other countries after the war, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or a bad design, right? Now, all that said, I still think the M1 rifle is better than the G43 as far as a semi-automatic battle rifle goes. I do think the G43 is slightly better than the SVT-40 for a couple of reasons. Accuracy is one. The G43, it just is more accurate. That's just the way it is. That's why the SVTs never were successful like designated marksman or sniper rifle. The G43 is shorter. I think it's a little more handy than the SVT, even though I think they're very similar in weight. And it's it's a rimless cartridge in the G43, so it's more reliable than an SVT-40, especially just in my experience with them. SVTs tend to be a little more finicky with the ammo. So Interchangeability of magazines is also a big plus in G43s compared to SVTs. SVT's a little more finicky with the mags you put in them. So that's where I stand there as far as that comparison goes. If you like this, sit down and chat sort of vertical format. Let me know. I think most of us watch YouTube on our phones, so this vertical is probably a little bit better for watching on a phone. But let me know what you think about it, if you like it or hate it or whatever, and I'll read all your comments. I still read all the comments on the video, so let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.